Dr. Jacob B. Freedland, a practitioner in private practice, an educator, and a man with a very keen interest in research, probably clinical research more than the heavy research that we're accustomed. I want to welcome you today, Jake, to this taping with the International College of Dentists for our video series of the outstanding men in dentistry. And you certainly are one of those, and we're very happy that you took time out of your busy retirement to come and spend a half a day with us and create this tape for history.
I'm very happy to be here, Bill, in any way I can be helpful. Dentistry has been very good to me for some 55 years, almost 56 years. I'm a survivor. It's been a good life.
You survived well, it looks.
I have no regrets.
Good. Before we get into some of the more current things or things that have happened in the recent years, I want to find a little bit about your background. I'd like to know a little about your parents, perhaps what your father did, whether you were influenced to go into dentistry by him, because I don't have this information in researching you. Most of it comes from these tons and tons of articles you've written, and so if you can give us some background on your early life.
I was born in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1913. My father had a small business, small department store in Wilmington at that time. Was a town about 20,000. And most of the business on Saturdays when the farmers came to town. I used to work in the business on Saturday. But my father lost his eyesight when I was about 2 or 3 years old. And I never saw a more frustrated human being than my father. You would consider me an indifferent, unambitious human being compared to my father, who lived a frustrated life. Being blind, never admitted that he was blind, and went out everywhere to see if somebody could help him. And of course, nobody could. Once the T-Hatch retinas developed, that tissue became atrophied. And I used to take him to the dentist. And I remember now very distinctly, and I've always remembered, going to Front and Princess Street, and Dr. Dreher was a dentist on the second floor of a United Cigar store. I used to watch him work on my daddy. Very pleasant gentleman. First time I saw National Geographics. And they were there in stacks. Well, I used to take him there and watch what he did. Went to him myself as a patient. That was my first introduction to dentistry as such. The family were reasonably well off. I had no great pressures on me. Went to the University of North Carolina after finishing high school, and I think enjoyed a good life. About the end of my academic years in Chapel Hill, the economics changed, early 30s. And I decided I needed to find something. I did not want to go into business. I didn't like it. Although there was a demand requirement that I be part of the family, I had no choice, but I felt a little disadvantaged. In a small town, everything happens of interest on Saturday. All the football games, all the social affairs, but I had to work. We worked from 7 in the morning till midnight. So I felt that was part of my life that I was unhappy about. Of course, once I went to Chapel Hill, which was a great institution, influenced my life greatly. Things changed for me, attitudinally. Knowing I didn't like the business, I decided to go in profession. So I took a pre-medical course when I went to Chapel Hill. And the money was scarce, and I decided dentistry was an easier route, really. And I went to Atlanta Southern Dental College. I was a proprietary school in those days. And there was a great deal of difference in my mind when I first went to Chapel Hill, the cross-section of the student body at dental school compared to the cross-section of the student body in Chapel Hill. It was not an elevating experience in the beginning. Of course, they came from all parts of the South. There were very few schools in the South. Had Loyola in New Orleans, and then you had Memphis had a school, University of Tennessee, which was miles away from North Carolina, and then MCV in Richmond. But North Carolina had always historically a greater affinity for the southern part of North Carolina than the Virginia part. So I went to Atlanta Southern. Most of the people who practiced dentistry in North Carolina were graduates of the Atlanta Southern College. That was 4 years then, and that was an education experience in other ways other than dentistry. It was a proprietary school. It was a school for profit. And you can always tell a school for profit when you take a look at the curriculum, how many hours are devoted to treating patients for income, because that's where the profit was. But in my years at school, in those days, the criteria for accreditation was very, very loose. We had some men there that were influenced my life. One was Walter T. McFall. Does that name mean anything to you?
No, I don't believe so.
Walter T. McFall had been in public health, came there, and there was an endowed chair in pedodontics. My family named Delos Hill. Of all the people who taught me, I'd say I remembered him with more affection and respect and regard, and we became great friends. And till he died. I had a big influence. I tell you, I would not be a dentist today if it hadn't been for Walter T. McFall. I got upset about something at the school, which I don't particularly care to make public here, but I was going to leave dental school March of my senior year. In fact, I was decided to go. Had he not prevailed on me, I don't think I would have stayed in dentistry.
Pretty drastic in your senior year.
It was, but I got angry, something I rarely ever do. I was offended by something that happened there, and I remember making a statement, I don't have to be a damn dentist to make a living. And whether that's true or not, I don't know, and I'll never know, but McFall was a very interesting influence on me. And we became friends, and we saw each other frequently. His son today is a professor at the University of North Carolina, Department of Periodontics. But I'd say especially in that period of my life, he probably was the most singular influential man. I got married after, in the Army actually. I got the commission at graduation. Three men got commissioned by the Army in 1939. The full implication of that I didn't understand at the moment, although it sounded like a compliment. It seemed like a compliment. But later on, when I looked back on it, I wasn't sure that it was altogether a compliment.
Those cold nights over Europe?
I went into the Army after that year, and I stayed there a while and came back to Charlotte in 1938. I knew if I stayed in the military in those days, it was not an area of growth. I had a chance to come back to North Carolina, which I did. Settled in Charlotte in 1938, and I've never regretted the move. And it's been good to me. I have no complaint.
That's wonderful. Of course, one of our friends who has now gone by the way is Harold Hillenbrand, who did so much for the military. As you know, you said in '38 there wasn't anything, and he made the dental corps of the military what it is.
He made the dental corps recognized by the military with a commission area.
Right.
I don't think anybody had a great impact on the growth of dentistry in a qualitative way equal to what Harold Hillenbrand did. He was a bright fellow, and he was effective with what he wanted to do. I personally miss him. I had a great admiration for him, knew him well. I considered him a friend. We could use another Harold Hillenbrand.
It would be very, very fine to have one right now. Sure would, Jake. Well, we got you back to North Carolina, and you're in practice. About how long did you practice before you got interested in your teaching?
One of the teachers I had in dental school was named Harry B. Johnson. Dr. Harry B. Johnson, in the early 30s, was the only specialist in endodontics in the world. He had a clinical practice, and he taught us endodontics, and he just lectured maybe once a week. Didn't do any of the clinical supervision of other people who did that. Well, a very interesting, dedicated human being. And I was interested in that for a lot of reasons. Removing teeth I never found attractive, and being in the Army when I was for 52 months became even more unattractive. And I was doing endodontics in those days, and that was not an easy thing to do. I was absolutely criticized by fellow practitioners, by some of the physicians. The folk infection concept had not died in the 30s. Right. And I've had people tell me in a very nice way, in a friendly way, advise me, why don't you stop doing that? You're creating a bad reputation here. And I said, I'm sorry, I think that what I'm doing is right. And there was occasions I'd send patients maybe back to Atlanta from Charlotte. In certain cases, I thought maybe I shouldn't try to handle it, but I was in a way influenced by public opinion to some extent. But I enjoyed what I did. And
were you doing some general practice along with your endodontic?
I was a general dentist
in the beginning. That was before the era of the specialties.
One of the things too that influenced me, there was a fellow on our floor, and I was in a professional building named Alonzo Myers, who's a orthopedic surgeon. Walked in my office one day and says, I need your help. He says, I've got a boy in my office that's hurting. He happens to be a hemophiliac. His father's a dentist. He said, nobody will touch him. And I said, let me look at him. This kid was about 18, 19 years old. Most of his teeth had decayed out. And we started working on him, and didn't want to take the roots out, although we did start taking some of his teeth out with small orthodontic rubber bands. There was a fellow in Chicago, I'd read that article in the ADA Journal, who treated these people by putting rubber bands on the root and adding one rubber band after another, and it would avulse the tooth, and it would cause a strangulation of the tissues, and it would become necrotic, although it was tender and sore. And that influenced me to the fact that you cannot take everybody's teeth out, even if you want to. Right. And that was part of my early experience, but the thing about that case impressed me by the fact his family resented the fact. Family didn't think I should do it, that being hemophiliac, I should leave him alone, but...
Even though his father was a dentist? So
I never met his father.
But didn't...
His father got killed in an accident. First year I was there, I never met him, but...
Well, you practiced along till the 40s. I'm a few years there, and then I know there's an interruption.
I was called in the service. I was called in August of 41 that they were going to call me. I went in the military in 1940, October 41, assigned to General Hospital. Stayed there for a couple of years, and then transferred as dental coordinator for special troops in the 3rd Army in Mississippi, and I stayed there until I went overseas the following February, and I stayed with the 3rd Army till the end of the war. Then transferred back to General Hospital again and brought back home, discharged in February of 46.
I know we were talking yesterday with the snow that you said you just did not care for the cold. It brought back too many cold nights.
Cold, wet, and hungry are the 3 things I remember most about the years I was in the Army. Patton had a very strict system. It could be 0 temperature, it could be snowing, it could be raining. You could not put the top up in the Jeep.
He wanted to see where he was going.
He would not. That's right. He wanted to know if you heard a saw playing something, you'd jump out. You couldn't put the top up in the back on.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Well, you got out of the service in 45, 46? 46.
Came back to Charlotte.
Came back to Charlotte.
My wife is from Salt Lake City. I went out to Salt Lake. I brought a group out on a special train for discharge at Fort Douglas. And I had 2 children then. One I'd never seen before, and I had a boy who's going on 4 years old. I'd seen about 6 months, so it was a happy occasion for me to come back.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, that's been repeated many, many times, and unfortunately, just even in the more recent year. You took up private practice again, and I'm sure you took up your endodontics again, your crusade.
Always had an interest. I wouldn't know if it was a crusade.
Well, I think in the early days it kind of was a crusade, because I remember a very good friend of yours that practiced where I come from, Oklahoma City, Larry Lucas, and he had the same problems. He had a crusade going there. And
I knew Larry. You know, the professional world is different than any other area of our society. I think there's a dimension of what I call, and the best word I know is gratification. I always think that the greatness we seek in this world is usually found in ourselves. And I think there's some real measure of pleasure, in my opinion, of things you do that brings you that type of satisfaction and gratification. And I think it's a reward, in a way, for yourself. And it has another tangible benefit. Gratification is not taxed by the government. So you can enjoy as much of that as you want to.
Not taxed yet.
Well, I don't know if they'll ever tax that. But I find that a very satisfying part of being a professional. Tangentially, I've been very distressed when the Federal Trade Commission 82, which I took away much, I think, of the professionalism I think that we had enjoyed for so many years.
A lot of us feel that way. We'll get into that a little later on. I'm kind of bringing you up, rearing you, so to speak, in a more chronological order. Did you affiliate with the University of North Carolina shortly after you got back?
North Carolina didn't start until 1950. What happened in North Carolina was a group of us got together and spent the money to bring in, can't think of his name, from St. Louis, to do a survey of dentistry in North Carolina. I really should remember his name. And made that data available to the state legislature. But the dentists, on a voluntary basis, paid for that survey. And that impressed the legislature, and they funded a dental school. The school started in 1950, and they were able to get to John Brower, who had been at Southern Cal and previously at the University of Washington, Seattle, as the first dean. And that first graduate was 1954. It was later, and I don't remember the year, when the dean called and asked if I'd come and teach. I was highly involved with the American Association of Endodontics. It was prior to when the board had been formed. The board actually wasn't recognized until 1964. But it was well on its way, I think, in the area of one of the special areas of dental practice. And that's when I started going to Chapel Hill, working with Dr. Shankle.
Well, I noticed on your CV that you were a clinical professor in operative dentistry. And at that time, did they have a department of endo, or?
They did not.
That's why, okay.
Many schools had departments in endodontics didn't really surface until after endodontics was recognized, and that was 1964.
Well, I presumed that, but I wanted to hear it because I knew that the ADA didn't recognize endo as a specialty even until 63.
In Atlantic City, in 1963.
And I want you to talk a little bit about that because I know that you were involved in that portion of the history of endodontics.
I was on the board. There were 9 of us on the board. The chairman was Ralph Sommer. And on that board were some of the significant names in dentistry, Bob Kiesel, Louis R. Grossman, John Engel, Larry Lucas, Harry Healy. With the exception of Larry and myself, every man on that board was the department chairman. Darrell Ostrander.
Yeah.
And just the relationship with these people alone was exciting and stimulating, and in many ways educational. And as time went on, I had chairmanship of 3 of the 4 committees on the board. I didn't understand that. I didn't think I was that eligible. Factually, I wasn't that eligible. Everybody knew I wasn't that eligible. And I didn't understand it. Do you know Ralph Sommer?
I don't know him personally. I know him by reputation.
I couldn't figure out. Some of the men resented my having that appointment, which I had nothing to do with it. But I concluded later on that Ralph wanted a neutral foreign body. He didn't want the Indiana program. He didn't want Grossman's Pennsylvania program or Ingalls. And I was the only neutral person there. He thought he could trust me, and I think maybe that's why I got the job.
I think he made a good selection.
I don't know, but I tell you, it was a challenge. It was a challenge. Yeah. I wasn't too secure with the responsibility.
Well, when you went to the American Dental Association for specialty recognition, can you give us a little background history on that and what kind of took place and whether it was scientific or political or combination? And I know you were there.
I was there. It's essentially political. I have some opinions about it, which may not be historically accurate, but they're my opinions.
That's what we need.
Dentistry was not a lucrative profession historically. When I came to Charlotte in 1938 to practice dentistry, They had one supply house there called Powers and Anderson. The man who was the manager there was named Clifton Lewis, who was an influence in my life in one way. I said, Cliff, what advice would you give me to practice dentistry in Charlotte? Only one thing. Look around. Don't make the same mistake the other guys are making. Yeah. Good advice. But once I got involved in with the board on endodontics, and that started in about, I'm trying to think of the year they formulated it, 46, maybe 49, 50. See, endodontics started in the middle of the war, 1943, when you couldn't get a reservation in a hotel, you couldn't get a seat on a train. About 19 or 20 men from California, Harry Johnson from Atlanta, Lou Grossman, R.B. Bender, came to Chicago in February and formed the American Association of Endodontics. It was Harry Johnson gave the term endodontology. The influence of the development really came out of Michigan more than any other place. And Ralph Sommer was really a very great leader in this way that he could decentralize the authority. And he, I think more than anyone else, accomplished that leadership. I'm not sure any other chairman would have been that successful. But during the war and after the war, dentistry became a much more desirable requirement on the part of the public. Economics were better. People were a little more self-conscious about their dentition. If you go back, and I hope you're old enough to remember the Pathé News, the newsreels, when Roosevelt would speak and forgot to put his partial in, he had one or two teeth that were visible. When this chap from Russia came over, who was the foreign minister, all of his teeth past his cusp were covered in gold crowns. It was not unusual for people to have missing teeth. Today, only the most indigent of our population would you ever see having a missing teeth. It's amazing, that transition in our society as far as dentistry is concerned. In dentistry, for the first time that I can recall or know anything about historically, became a successful profession from an economic reference. I think endodontics was recognized in a way because there was a need with all the restorative dentistry being done. And in those days, we didn't fully understand pulp damage, didn't fully understand why it happened and how to correct it. And extractions weren't that readily accepted by the public anymore. In order to save some of the expensive dentistry being done, endodontics became a very instrumental part of salvaging expensive dental work, and the people who did the work were pleased to have endodontics done. It was a slow transition because with the focal infection spilling over, a lot of people had some fear. I remember a case maybe I shouldn't mention, but I will.
Good.
One of the directors of one of our Duke Power Company was a patient of mine. He had Berger's disease. That's a circulatory problem, and it affected the terminal part of one of his feet. And he was having the lower part of his foot amputated at Mayo's. And they had a rule there that if you had an endodontic procedure, that teeth had to come out. And part of that focal infection, to reflect back, they had a microbiologist there named Rosenau, who felt very strongly about the focal infection concept. He would get a net and try to catch bugs up in the air. And that was, at that time, I think a fellow named Gardner was head of that clinic. Do you remember that? At Mayo's. They had a dental division there. And
no, I don't know who the...
he called me on the phone. He said, they want to take out these teeth. I said, don't take them out. He said, can I make that decision? I said, they're your teeth. Don't take them out. He died with his teeth. But that was a concept that had carried over, and I was surprised that Mayo still had it. If I may add an extension to that story, in the war I was assigned to Stock General Hospital, and the Mayo Hospital unit was militarized in Stock General Hospital. I was one of the cadre to orient the Mayo Clinic into the military. But they had a new department chairman there named Sun, a very fine gentleman, who had abolished that concept when he came in. But I remember that very distinctly, bias against the endodontic procedure.
Well, the cardiologists, particularly in those days, They wouldn't let you keep, or they didn't want you to keep non-vital teeth or
they didn't understand transibacteremia.
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
I don't think they understand it now either.
We'll get into that a little later. We have the specialty of endodontics, and then you mentioned
Can we go back to transibacteremia a minute?
Oh, sure.
There was a study done at Pennsylvania in which they manipulated an endodontic procedure just because of the carryover of the focal infection concept, and without a rubber dam, manipulated into the apex beyond the root, and it took a blood sample from the elbow, and in 20 minutes they could find no organism. The small aperture at an apex does not allow a high volume of organism to the bloodstream, and even with a mechanical manipulation. That was a fairly documented study that was done in Pennsylvania. Of course, this was done maybe the last 8 or 9 or 10 years, but I distinctly remember that reference. We learn slowly.
Well, sometimes I think we feel we know, and it makes it more difficult to learn. Now, that's a crazy statement, but...
I understand what you're saying. Well, we're slow to change sometimes,
right.
But we're convinced.
Right. I was going to mention before the specialty was accepted by the American Dental Association, you had already created the American Board of Endodontics, I think, a few years prior.
That's right.
What was your parameters? What were your requirements or your basic requirements for an individual to become a board-certified member of the American Board of Endodontics?
Well, actually, from the board, we didn't have that. That wasn't part of our initial problem. And I was put on the board, the original board. There were several of the men who had died or had resigned, retired. But I replaced RL493, who at that time became Speaker of the House and later President of the ADA. And when he resigned from the board because of his affiliation with the ADA, and this was an area of controversy to some extent, I replaced RL493. That was in 60. I don't remember.
Early 60s, I think, wasn't it? That's okay.
It was an interesting experience because there was no great support for specialties. There was a negative attitude among dentists about specialization.
Too many specialties.
It's a misnomer. It's a mistake in concept. It's a mistake in judgment, in my opinion. I like to ask you sometimes to look back at 1920s, early 30s, and see some of the writings of Dr. Alfred Oury, who was a Minnesota graduate, who was dean at Minnesota, went to Columbia University. If you were to read some of his publications in 1930, at the time we had more dental schools than we have today, that you would see a man who was a prophet, that was repudiated in a sense by the organized profession. And it's sad, I have some of his papers with me today, and I'll let you see him after we get through with this taping. Dentistry actually is a part of healthcare. It's a health provider. Dentistry is a specialty in itself, as is ophthalmology, cardiology. There's an insecurity among dentists, and I don't understand it. I think we know about as much about dentistry as any field of endeavor knows about its own particular field. I think we know about dentistry as any physician would know about medicine. But I don't know why they feel that a specialty has in itself a contradiction. No specialty can exist or survive economically if he doesn't get support from the general dentist.
True.
Seldom does a patient walk off the street and go see a specialist, maybe with the exception of an oral surgeon if he has a toothache and wants a tooth out. It's a benefit to the patient to be referred from a general dentist. He has a free observer to protect his interests when his general dentist refers him. And it adds on the specialist a responsibility to please the referral source. So there's a protection here for the patient. But why the Academy of General Dentistry and some of them feel that a subspecialty, which is what I think endodontics is, or orthodontics, or maxillofacial surgery. It's a subspecialty in the same that gastroenterology is a subspecialty in internal medicine or cardiology. I don't understand this attitudinal reference. It's partially political, partially economic, but I think it's a misconcept.
No, I'm very thankful in my practice that I can pick up the telephone or refer my patients to...
How about sharing a burden?
That's right. Lend me some of your support. I need it. Because we all can't do everything. It's just an impossibility. Okay, now we have the board, and that was created, that you were part of. Then when did the American Association of Endodontics come into play?
1943.
That was even back further.
That was the first. That was an organized group of people interested in endodontics. That preceded me. I was in the Army then.
Well, I was doing war years. I didn't realize that it formulated during the war years.
Some of the leaders at that time had an interest to form a sort of association. The board was recognized in '63 in Atlantic City. The specialty was recognized in '63, and the board was recognized in '64. There was some unhappiness with the recognition of endodontics, I thought.
Oh, yes.
Roya, I couldn't think of it. Quentin Roya was at that time chairman of the Council on Education. Even after we were recognized by the House of Delegates as a recognized specialty, recognized the board, the ADA took no action. And I was trying to think of Quentin's name earlier when I was talking to Lamar. He wanted to have a meeting of the council to hold in abeyance the decision of the House of Delegates, which I didn't think was in his province. And I called John Ingle then, who was Dean of Southern California, to tell him that we'd held back all these years from people announcing, especially because it was a violation of principle of ethics, to announce especially had not been recognized by the ADA. Tell Dr. Roya I couldn't hold them back anymore, that they had every reason, every right to announce under the current laws of the ADA and still be ethical. He didn't yield too much, so Ralph Sommer and I, and there was one or two other people. Larry Lucas may or may not have been there in Chicago in February. We met with Harold Hillenbrand, and he did a telephone poll of the Council on Education and said, go ahead. In February, we held our first examinations for certification as diplomates in 1965 in Detroit. I was also at that time president of AAE. That was our first meeting, and then we had one the following later that year in Memphis, Tennessee, with the second board holding.
Now, since that first board of certification, so to speak, has there been a great deal of change in the requirements or your, what I want to say?
The scope of the field.
Yeah, to be a board certified now.
There was one change they made, which I didn't agree with, and that was on the build-up. See, endodontics had, the parameters of endodontics contained itself with the pulp and those tissues affected as a result of pulp disease. There were some interest in maybe referral stimulation to do a build-up and to make a post for the patient, which actually was not in the scope. Some of the men felt since they were doing it or it was being done, requested by the dentist, should be included in the scope. My feeling was, as part of restorative dentistry, didn't belong in the field of endodontics. They took it to the Council on Education, who approved the addition of making a post preparation by the endodontist. Well, we would make a post space without doing the post and build up for that. But then the ADA Council did approve the building of the post.
Well, I want to change gears here a little bit. We've talked pretty much about the beginnings of endodontics, the formation of the boards and associations. I know you have a vital interest in 2 or 3 things we're going to talk about here now, and one is the overall image of our profession of dentistry. I know that's of keen interest to you. We've discussed it a little, but I'd like for you to elaborate those feelings.
I don't think the image of dentistry, as I view it, is fully perceived either by the profession or by the public at large. If you look at the data on dental health and dental disease, if you look back into history, what a terrible thing it was for mankind to suffer from excruciating pain, which there was no answer. And nor was there for any treatment. Can you imagine the horrible pain that would be created by removing a tooth without any anesthetic? It wasn't in 1908 we had developed an anesthetic by Einhorn. But think of all the centuries prior to 1908. If you take a look at some of the artwork that was done of the great pain and suffering that people had, one of the stories that impressed me is sort of a classic in Scandinavia. Rota means the red serpent. It tells a story there when King Harald Bluetooth, I don't know if you know this story or not.
No, not yet.
King Harald Bluetooth had a pulpless tooth, a pulpless cuspid. Because the tooth had discolored, history identified him as King Harald Bluetooth. When he had an acute exacerbation, it made him mean, and people were frightened when he became involved with this pain. And he had absolute authority. You know, if he was displeased with somebody, he said, cut his head off, boy, that head would come right off. But the one thing about that treatment, which I found fascinating, when he had a chill, they put 2 young virgins in bed with him to warm him up, and that's a treatment that we have abolished in modern times. But if you can imagine what the weather was like in Scandinavia in those days, they didn't have glass windows, used to use tapestries over the openings. But about the 10th century, part of the forays into Ireland and England, and you know, the Vikings rode all the way over to the eastern part of the Mediterranean. They brought back 2 priests from Ireland who brought a bell with them, because part of their evangelical projections was to Christianize the world, part of the Christian mission. And so they brought him in to see King when he was having one of his acute exacerbations. They made up a poultice. And what they did, they took some of the mold off the wall and rubbed it on the bell, which was a holy relic, and made a poultice for him, and he got better. And that started the Christianization of Scandinavia. So don't underestimate the impact of dentistry on the history of mankind.
Well, if you stop...
That's documented. Yeah. I even have that formula here if you want, so I won't take up the time. It's interesting.
Well, it's not our time, it's your time.
But that was a fascinating story.
It is. That's very interesting.
Some of our great contributors in research has come out of that particular area. We had lunch with one today, Dr. Harold Lowe.
Oh, wonderful gentleman.
Most significant dentist in the world, in my opinion, today, and has done probably as much to raise the image and the quality of dental health.
Very much.
But when I talk about the image of dentistry, what have we done as dentists for the health of this country? When I was in dental school, 1930s, I would say, and I'm not guessing altogether, but I can't give you an accurate figure, almost half the people in this country, 50 years old or older, had dentures.
Just about right.
If you had arthritis, bursitis, water on the knee, crick in the neck, they pulled your damn teeth out.
That's right.
That followed Billings and Hunter's comment in Canada in 1906, 1911, talking about the organisms from the oral cavity, which is another, I'll get back in a minute to some of the replacements. But this country was the only country that really took that attitude of extractions. Now, there was an improvement in people after full mouth extraction, which wasn't understood. The trauma to the system activated pituitary glands, which flooded the body with ACTH. ACTH is controlled by the adrenal glands. When you stimulate the adrenal glands, it floods the body with ACTH. And they had a relief of pain in the early days of the trauma. Now you can compare that, if you can remember going to a wedding and a grandmother, a grandfather who was arthritic, all of a sudden didn't need the cane. The excitement of the wedding, they improved actually. It was a similar type of stimulation. Mm-hmm. But as soon as the body readjusted itself, then they became equally as bad off, or some of the works done in England indicate that of further deterioration. So that was a misunderstood concept. The gold traps in the people's mouth that Hunter was talking about, I think is another fascinating story. The Spanish discovered chocolate, considered an aphrodisiac, kept it a secret for almost 100 years. With all of the infighting and exchange between the British and the English and the French and the Spanish, they got a hold of chocolate and became part of the elegance and joy of the courts. And decay became rampant in that particular culture. Started transplantation of teeth. There's a picture by Rowlandson, 1787, showing the transplantation of teeth on this particular painting which he had done. They bought the teeth from the poor people and would replant them into the landed gentry. But it became an unattractive area and resource, so they start robbing the cadavers in order to get teeth. And they found they were transmitting syphilis. And that stopped the transplantation of teeth in those days. In the South, in the antebellum days, women in the South had adopted some of the English culture. The women were supposed to look good, be social, play the piano or the clavichord, and learn how to sew and embroider and eat sweets. And they too had dental decay. A young girl had a massive decayed tooth in front did not become romantically attractive. And the veterinarian used to line up the slaves and see a tooth that matched it and do the transplant. It didn't last too long. They didn't really know what they were doing.
They had a vision.
Well, it was a sort of a desperate effort.
Yeah.
But there is a documentation in Ecuador by the Cholo Indians, and I have a picture of a lateral incisor being placed in a central incisor socket. I have a picture of that skull. Mm-hmm. And also they had a case of a piece of stone that had been carved and did a implant of stone, and the back was completely covered with calculus. These are the same people that did the head shrinking. Yeah. There's a lot in history that we have never identified that people have done to salvage the dentition.
Well, you know, when you were talking about the image of the profession, there was a very dear friend of mine who was an orthodontist, Harry Sarles, in Oklahoma, that he had the same idea. He said people don't appreciate the fact that dentists are responsible for a tremendous amount of the gross national product because of all the farmers that grow things and the things we eat all have to go through the oral cavity, and that should be one of the very finest organs of our body and in tip-top shape.
I agree with that. I don't know why there's been that segmentation, and I think it's been perpetuated. Our system perpetuates it. We have an American Association, American Dental Association, American Association of Dental Schools, National Association of Dental Examiners. Here are 3 segments of dentistry, each having different responsibilities, and very little communication. I attended in 1983, 84, the first time American Dental Association met, American Association of Dental Schools. And I was surprised that they'd never met before. They've never met where all 3 were together to share a common interest and a common purpose.
Well, we have our own problems internally, but to carry this just a little bit further away from the public and get more specific back into the medical field, I noticed you've made a comment or two in our discussions that how you feel, and I also agree, the lack of knowledge of dentistry that is in our medical profession. And I'd like to have you say a few words about.
Well, I think I showed you that thing that Dr. Wintonitz did
Yes.
when he spoke at graduation. It was not for the fact that he had teeth. He would never heard teeth mentioned during his 4 years in medical school, and he at that time was dean of the medical school at Yale University. I think that's only one area. I think, too, in the whole healthcare area, I've been involved in geriatrics. It's an ignored part of society. It's a cultural problem more as well as a professional problem. We don't really have much sense of commitment to the elders. And people are living longer. When I was born, the average lifespan in this country was 52 years. Today it's about 77. So in spite of all the pollution and all the things we say that are bad, we've enhanced lifespan almost 3 months a year the last 60 years. People do live longer. The largest section of our population are the elderly people. Our profession isn't very keenly interested in that area. We have roughly 350, 400 dentists. I can't get one of them to spend a half a day a month with me. Another problem is home care. Who takes care of these people who are incompetent? They have Alzheimer's disease. Some of them must have food in their mouth for weeks on end. Right. We've hired somebody to go by and do this every day for these people. It's a service that's going to get larger and bigger. There's a need for this service, and the most significant part of it for dentistry, and what really got me interested in for a while, was my resentment at the attitude of some people in the profession. We had too damn many dentists because they weren't busy.
Right.
There's a whole world of people out there who need help. Nobody appreciates a dentician more than an older person. There's no satisfaction to the quality of life. You can't sit down and eat a meal. So I think that we have missed, to some extent, sufficient interest in that area of service.
We're just about to wind up the first segment of this tape, Jake, and I think this will be a good time to take a break, and we'll continue here in a few moments. Well, Jake, we're going to begin the second portion of this interview. We found that we put this in 2 separate tapes that can be shown at meetings, a half one time, and then everybody wants to rush back and see the second half, the final ending, kind of like these miniseries that we see on television. And also, we know that the attention span of most of these dentists in the audience is about 10 minutes, so we can't give them 2 hours at one time. We'll pick up again where we were talking a while ago about the image of dentistry, and most of this we were talking about in the United States, and there is a tremendous image of some fine international dentists that we are privileged to even know.
There are 2 dimensions to that. The average person in our society who's a non-professional views dentistry from a very singular reference. Their own experience with a dentist, whether they had a tooth filled or a procedure done or a child that needed orthodontics. And that image of dentistry to me is very narrow and very inaccurate. Today, in our country, we've had maybe as many as a dozen or more dentists who are presidents of health centers, vice chancellor for health affairs, not only the senior officer for medical school, dental school, nursing school, pharmacy school, public health. I know in our own state of North Carolina, Garland Hershey, who used to be an assistant or associate dean, the vice chancellor for health affairs. That's been true in maybe a dozen of the schools across the country. It's true in Florida, Southern California, Louisiana, and some of these men are president of the university. We have John DiBiagio, president of Michigan State. We had Joe Volcker, who developed one of the major medical centers in America. And he was followed by Scotty McCallum, who was dean of dental school, also president of Birmingham, University of Birmingham Medical Center. We have Ackle, who's president of Old Dominion University in in Virginia. And I think that dentists have today evolved into significant individuals whose contribution in the broad area education is significant for the first time in the history of dentistry, the history of this country or anywhere else. The president of the University of Puerto Rico, Dr. Ponte, is a dentist. I think that is not generally known. I fault the ADA in a way, which I think is the primary instrument who should project the dental image for the nation, since it has the major membership of any organization in this country and one of the major organizations in the world. And the world looks at America, at the United States, as the fountainhead of dental science and dental technology. Part of this growth came out of the Second World War. And some of the scientists came here from Europe. When you think of Gottlieb, Orban, Zischer, they established a scientific base here that is still growing and very significant. And they developed many, many of the students here who have continued the growth. We have imported, in a way, great talent because some countries structure the educational system with a cutoff point. There are a few that have research centers. Their economics may not be conducive to other extensive support. And these men who want to continue to grow come to this country, but there's no limit to the growth. Dr. Harold Lowe, who is director of dental research at the National Institute of Health, is, in my opinion, one of the most significant dentists in the world, happens to be a Norwegian, educated in Norway at the Royal Dental College in Oslo. He became one of the deans at Aarhus in Sweden, came to this country at the University of Michigan, then is dean of the University of Connecticut School of Dentistry, and then appointed head of National Institute of Dental Research. Last year, Dr. Lowe was given $159 million for one fiscal year for dental research, which I think is significant for dentistry and for the future of dentistry, which has a very significant contribution to make to the United States and the world at large, certainly where Western civilization is.
You might add on to that the comparison of figures. That sounds like a lot of money for dental research, but you were showing me
how much is multiplied over the years.
And how much is saved.
Dr. Lowe made a very significant statement that I think people who sit in judgment on how much money is justified for dental research made the statement. The 40th anniversary of NIDR, which was just a few years ago, when he appeared before the committee, he stated to them in very simple elementary English, "Gentlemen, the amount of money we save the American public in 1 year by fluoridation and preventive care is infinitely more than all the money you've given us for dental research in 40 years. So the government has gotten a lot of profit out of their support for dental research.
I wanted you to bring that up. That's a good point. Along these lines of this, Jake, I know you have an avid interest in history, and to listen to you speak is very evident that you are a historian. And let's talk a little bit about the history of our profession, history of dentistry. Some of the things you'd like to comment.
Most of what I've seen in the dental reference has been the pain and removal of dentition. I don't think the public today or the profession really understands what a terrible thing dental pain was to mankind. I mentioned the point earlier about Harold Bluetooth, King Harold Bluetooth. That's not a big issue today. We have made what was one of the worst problems of mankind into a simple problem today that anybody can get a solution to any discomfiture in dentistry. I've also been impressed too with what some of the pre-Columbian people did, where they used teeth for decoration and how much respect they had for the anatomy of a tooth. And that's been a fascinating interest of mine. And I mentioned earlier about the Cholo Indians who did the early transplants 1,600 years before man ever really considered doing it in Western civilization. I don't find too much interest in that area of dentistry, which puzzles me, because I think that anybody who understands from whence we came to where we are must have a much stronger sense of gratification and appreciation of what he's doing each day. And that, to me, I think, is enough of a measure to maybe spend more time with some of our younger students to understand the history of the profession.
Now, you said a key word, which is going to bring us right into our next topic, the student of today. And I know you have some very definite views on the student of your era and the students that you've taught and the student of today. And we'd like to hear a few comments.
Bill, I don't know how many days you went to school where you went. We went to school 6 days a week.
We did.
Now we go 5 days a week. And although I've been teaching in Chapel Hill on a part-time basis for a number of years, in the geriatric program we bring in three senior students and some hygienists, but no one has experience with a handicapped, medically compromised patient. And I spend some time with them. I find a lack of intellectual curiosity with them, the world around them, their interest in the cultural side of life, of which dentistry must be a part. I can't find very many dentists who have an interest in the community outside of the church and the civic club, which is in itself a good resource for getting patients. Being active in the community has a limitation for a dentist who works by appointment. By the same token, working by appointment is not the sole substance of life itself. I don't find too many of them read much. I fault the schools to some extent for not having at least some cultural dimension in the 4 years of education. We talk about holistic dentistry. When you look at a patient who has a dental problem or any other medical problem, you have to look at the whole person. You talk to many of the diagnosticians, they will tell you there's a vast amount of information from the patient if you'll only listen.
Right.
I think this is more than just a technical requirement of serving a patient's needs. Who knows what a patient values as their dentition? Let me give you a case that took place, just came to mind. One day in Charlotte in April, we had a terrible snowstorm. None of my help could come to work. I might add, I've never missed a day being able to go to the office because of weather. But I didn't argue the point. If it starts to snow in North Carolina, particularly in Charlotte, there's a panic. The stores close, everybody rushes home, the grocery stores are jammed, people are preparing for a long season. It'll last sometimes as much as 24 hours or 40 hours. Anyway, it's a convenient panic, shall I say. So when my help can't come, I married a substitute. She's always available. I went to the office to see a patient, and I could look out my window, and I had a patient that lived maybe 50 yards from the office on Henley Place. Called, said it's just too bad for her to come out, which I understood.
I understand.
My wife comes in, and I was working on a patient. She says, there's a lady out here to see you, and she's got a terrible toothache. I said, I'll see her as soon as I can. And this lady said for me to tell you, she's really hurting. I had put her in one of the rooms. Woman was 82 years old. Came to see me from Hickory, North Carolina, about 52 miles away, in a taxi.
Oh, my. Uh-huh.
Oh, she had a very, very uncomfortable lower right first molar. I'll never forget her. That's a very interesting story. It may be more important than anything else I'll say this afternoon. She had all 32 teeth. Mm-hmm. Well, I got her anesthetized and opened up the tooth, and I'll tell you how all the suppuration bubbles out. And I said, I'm surprised that you came in all this bad weather. All my patients have canceled except one or two. And I said, is Dr. Clark your son in here? Yes, he is. Did you talk to him? Yes, I called him up. He said, Mama, why don't you pull your tooth out? And she said, why did you pull your tooth out? You went to see Dr. Freedland. I said, I'm impressed you went to this effort to save this tooth. He said, Doctor, it takes a long time to grow a tree, and some damn fool can cut it down in one day.
True.
I finished her. She said, how much do I owe you, doctor? And I said, Miss Clark, you probably paid me the greatest compliment I've ever had from a patient as long as I've been practicing. I don't want to charge you. I'm just that pleased to see you and the compliment you paid me in saving a tooth. I've spent my life doing this. And you're the best example of what I've tried to do with my life of anybody I've ever met. She says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be obligated to you. So, Mrs. Clark, I charge so many dollars to do a case like that. She said, well, I'm not going to be that obligated. This was in April. Never heard a word from her. Apparently got along all right. Christmas, on this yellow-brown paper with the blue lines in the country school, I get a note from her and a check for $25. Never cashed it.
Great.
Interesting story of people, the value she placed on that tooth. Not to have it, now mind you, to come in taxi. And let me tell you about her. Her husband was superintendent of schools in a small rural community. She was a teacher. She had a son that was an MD that I had treated earlier. She had one son worked for the government who translated Russian agricultural publications for the Department of Agriculture. She had another son who taught physics at one of the universities in the East. Said, Doctor, we don't owe anybody a penny for their education. I think that's Americana in its purest form. I never will forget her.
That would be a highlight in your practice. That's very true. I know we were talking at lunch earlier about the first documentation of the value of a human tooth, that you had a very interesting story.
It's been troubling, without using a personal pronoun, it's been troubling to me that we had in a little town of Florence, South Carolina, a man named Sexton, had a denture mill. People would come from states away on a bus, loaded up to go down, and he had a nominal charge for a full up and lower denture. The impressions were taken with the dentition in place. And as you know, you can cut off the area the teeth are and just anticipate what the ginger would be. And that was how he made a living. He paid the highest income tax of any citizen in the state of South Carolina. It was troubling to me. I can't think of any other organ in the human body that is so indiscriminately discarded as the human dentition. And if you look at the Bible, in Exodus 21st chapter, 27th verse, it states categorically the value of a tooth. That if a slave is struck by a master and he should knock out a tooth, his punishment of the master, that he must free the slave. And that's, I assume to a master that a slave was an item of inventory that has some value. But he could not abuse a person in his complex to the extent of knocking out a tooth. I thought it was the first significant reference to the value of a tooth, which we have ignored if we have any biblical reference. It's also an opinion that in the New Testament, 19th chapter 6 verse, wherefore the flesh is no more trained up, man pull asunder that which God has joined together. It had nothing to do with marriage. I think it meant for people who took out teeth committed to some form of sinfulness, for a tooth didn't have to be removed for the welfare of the patient. I've had this discussion with some of the ministers who don't accept my interpretation of the Bible.
I can't see it.
But when you see you have about 500 Christian denominations and all the television evangelists, there are many interpretations of the Bible. I just want to give you mine.
There you go, just as valid.
But I don't know why, if a surgeon removes an organ from a human being, he could be greatly challenged in litigation, and there'd be no question they would settle that out of court. Why isn't that true of the dentition? I don't understand that. The government does not support that part of therapy for people, and I think it's a flaw in the system. think it's a mistake for the public, and I think it's a mistake in concept.
Well, along those lines, the value of a tooth, of course, I feel, and I know you do too, that our profession has done a great deal in the past few years to preserve those teeth. And what in your mind might be some of the most significant preventive measures today that we are offering the public?
At the risk of being challenged when I leave here today, maybe having to move from where I've been living for 55 years, 56 years, I think the greatest source of health expense as such, dentistry and medicine, I would ascribe to patient or professional negligence. There's no way that the health professions has either in number or in facilities all of the requirements to serve a public which does damage to themselves with bad habits, expect some miraculous answer from the health providers which is not there. And I think that has not been addressed. All we talk about preventive dentistry, preventive medicine. If you take a look at all the special areas of dentistry, which we have 8, 6 of whom serve the public in a clinical reference, 2 of whom do not, one of which is public health dentistry. Of all the professional groups we have, the smallest number are people in public health dentistry. And I think that's a flaw. I don't know whether we don't make it attractive enough to recruit these people. But this is an area that I think we need to address. The government does the best job within the public health service. But I think that each state and each community that has a public health department should have a public health dentist. We were very fortunate in 1949 in my community. We fluoridated the water supply in 1940. You could look at a child and tell that child was born in our county. You could also tell a child was not born in our county, just by the difference in the actual decay, missing, and filling teeth. So there's much we can do in prevention that we cannot do in trying to correct it. I imagine the cost of fluoridating common water supply may run 10 cents a year. So if you live to be 60 years or 70 years old, the actual cost of fluoridation wouldn't equal one small elementary filling. So economically, it's beneficial. I think it's true of medicine too. Although I come from a tobacco state, and it's part of our economy, I think the government would be better served to subsidize the tobacco farmers rather than pay the high cost of health care for all the diseases that tobacco generates.
Well, we're making some progress there too. I think that fortunately we're beginning to get these smoke-free areas, and it's slow, but it's hard.
It's hard for me to understand people who smoke in the face of the evidence today. It's hard for me to understand the compulsion. And
we have that same problem with the youngsters in the smokeless tobacco. That's another thing that's very difficult to understand, why they want to get into that situation.
You know, Pinbar has done some research. You know, if you've ever been into some of the places that sell snuff, he's never found an oral malignancy from snuff dippers in Scandinavia. And you know, a lot of the snuff you see is Copenhagen snuff, Denmark snuff. I don't understand the difference between Scandinavia dipping. I don't see too much snuff dipping today. You talking about chewing tobacco, maybe?
Well, they have both chewing tobacco and snuff.
I remember talking about this at great length, and he said he has never found any actual oral malignancy from any of the people who do snuff. It may be the additional ingredients that are placed in those that we use here.
I was just speaking of some situations that I'm personally acquainted with, and you'll see a patient, a young college kid, and he comes in, and in lateral border, you'll see this white area about the size that he lays that in there, and I say, tell him about it, and oh, what do you do one day? He said, it gets sore. I said, I just changed over to the other side.
Leukoplakia lesion?
Yeah. And
I had a patient came to see me from West Virginia one time because her sister was a relatively good friend. I knew this child in years back, and her mouth was covered. And I tried to talk to her. I said, you've got what in essence could be precancerous lesion. We can remove some parts of your anatomy that's malignant. We cannot remove a mouth.
True. True.
She didn't quit smoking.
Nope.
How do you get their attention?
That is a good question. And, you know, the parents are always saying, well, doctor, you talk to them because I'm sure they're going to listen to you more than they will us.
I have a suggestion. Anybody who comes under a health care system and a corporation ought to evaluate their employees. If you're 50 pounds overweight, there's certain actuarial data to indicate in the course of time you would have certain types of health impairments. That patient or that employee should be charged an additional stipend to cover their health costs, not lay that burden purely on the corporate funding. If that patient had some other habits, alcohol, abuse substances, I think that's the only way you're going to get the attention of an average person in our society. They have an interest only if you hit them in the pocketbook above almost any other way of approaching it. It doesn't sound brutal to me. I could endorse that with a great deal of comfort. I wish they would do it. One of our major banks at home didn't move in that direction, but moved in the direction of counseling, explaining to people what the negative values were with certain habit patterns, and got accused of violating their basic rights, and they stopped it. Yeah. Thought it an invasion of privacy. I would say to them, you're also invading our principle.
True. Well, since we're on a little bit of the disease situation, let's bring up one of the most popular subjects that are taking place, particularly not only to the public, but very much so in the dental office, and that's the AIDS situation and the impact of CDC and OSHA on us who practice.
I think the Begalis case was a tragedy, certainly for the Begalis woman. When I first read about that, having practiced dentistry for many, many years, I could not understand how it happened. In fact, they had 5 patients who had some identification with AIDS, presumably from his office. The men involved, I don't know there was any documentation what their particular lifestyle was either, so I don't know whether they were friends of his or associates of his, what element of society they I just never could find out, although I heard and saw documentation of those patients by one of the members from the Centers of Disease Control from Atlanta. But to my knowledge, it's the only case that I know of that's been documented where a dentist caused a specific disease that the dentist had. I was concerned too at one time when this thing first surfaced, it's only been 11 years ago, that the HIV virus. And you know, San Francisco has had a long history of a haven, shall I say, for certain aspects of our society. These people were treated in dental offices, dental clinics, medical clinics, wherever they went as part of the society. I don't know of any documented case where there was transmitted from any of these people the HIV virus. If it was so, I've never seen it. Now, we know that you can transmit that disease. It's a contact disease. But that it is that easily obtained in routine care, I don't know. But there's such a frenzy and a panic about it that I think there's been an overreaction. Strangely enough, today the homosexuals are showing a reduction, well, that's not true of the heterosexuals. And the frightening thing for me are the young people now involved.
That's it.
It is rampant in other cultures in Africa and South America today. Pinborg says that in Sao Paulo is absolutely extensively involved. I don't know that we're addressing it with any resolution. As I understand the disease and the way it attaches itself to the nucleus of a cell, that if you kill the virus in the cell, you kill the patient. The only thing that I perceive right now is the possibility of some inoculation that can prevent the virus from taking hold. I see no answer to the solution. They have now prolonged in life with AZT, but I see no answer. And it's really a miserable way to die. The dentist, I think, been frightened by it. Legally, you can't deny patient service. On the other hand, there's another practical dimension. If the people find out that you're treating an AIDS patient, and I've treated AIDS patients, I have no problem with it. I'll admit that I am super careful, and my personnel want me to be super careful, as they are. There's some dentists that won't see them, not because they don't want to work on them, but there's a fear that if the public finds out they have an AIDS patient, they will not come to that office. So there's a sort of a gray area here, what is right and what is wrong, and all the altogether wrong. And I understand too that some of the surgeons would prefer, in their own graceful way, not to participate in any surgical invasive procedures for the patient who has AIDS.
Along that line, and something that we thought that was eradicated, you know, tuberculosis has reared its ugly head again, and it's come to the forefront, a strain that's resistant to most of the antibiotics. Have you?
I know about that. What its real benefits and application, I really don't know, but I'm surprised to find that tuberculosis has started to surface again. It's an almost environmental disease. People who live too close together, it surfaced in the early years in the Industrial Revolution. And may I refer back in a tangential sense, a very eminent man in the history of this country is a Frenchman named René Dubose. Wrote a book called The Mirage of Health. If you have not read it, I urge you to get a copy. And in that book, he once raised the question, what do you think are the two most significant discoveries that enhanced the quality of life? What would you say they were? He said, glass and the fabrics you could wash. That once a fabric could be washed, people were wearing skins, which was really a resource for contamination, and glass, which lets the sunlight in, that because these dark, damp places were somewhat breeding grounds for organisms. Not very significant. He was a microbiologist, president of Sloan Kettering, amazing guy.
Well, we have another one here that's been confronting us for about the past 10 years, and that's the ruling that the Supreme Court made on the so-called right of the patient to know. I know you have some ideas on that.
No objection about the right to the patient to know. I have some
in this aspect.
I have an objection to the ruling of the Federal Trade Commission, supported the Supreme Court, that equates a profession and a trade as being the same. I think it was a disservice to the public. And as a disservice to the public, I think it was a disservice to the profession. It became tempting to, I think, to some professionals to present themselves with advertising. Now, my concept of an advertiser, that he's advertising for himself. When General Motors shows you a gorgeous-looking woman, beautifully dressed, standing next to a Cadillac, and a man with her, obviously a successful man, who's the owner of the Cadillac, representing you that in order to look successful, you buy a Cadillac. Well, if you are successful, you can afford a Cadillac. If you want to look successful, you're going to go broke. Of course, you're advertising General Motors, not advertising the patient. And I find that's true, too, in the health field. The public is not astute enough, in my opinion, to make that value judgment about a service. One of the things about licensure, one of the things about the professional world, it encompasses a 5-letter word called trust. True. When you have a pain, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need a major procedure. The patient doesn't know. Therefore, I think that that ruling on the Federal Trade Commission that professions and trades are the same was an error in judgment, and was a disservice to both the public and the profession.
All right, let's go along just a little bit with the degrees that are offered to the dentist.
Confusing. The term doctor has been abused in our society. What kind of doctor are you talking about? You have a doctor of osteopathy, doctor of chiropractic, doctor of education, you have a doctor of divinity, you have a doctor of medicine. I notice that most medical men, no matter what their identifications are, it'll be Bill Hopkins, MD. You don't see AB or BS or MS with it. It's MD encompasses the quality of the designation individual. Dentistry has 2 degrees. One is Doctor of Dental Surgery, which I think is obsolete in our present concept of dental education. Have Doctor of Dental Medicine, DMD. I think that the schools ought to get together and have 1 degree. Right. The accreditation requirements for a DMD degree and a D are exactly identical. And therefore I think that we only need 1 degree.
And perhaps the latter, the DMD, is the better of the 2.
Whichever one is desirable, I think is fine, but I think we need only 1.
Because we are becoming a little more involved with medicine than we were in the past.
Absolutely.
We've talked from way back in the early centuries up to now, and a question I might ask you is progress our most important product?
Depends on how we look at progress. If you look at progress from the standpoint of economics, and we measure everything by dollars a day, the answer to that question is no, it is not. I think we lose sight sometimes of what we call marketing. There's nothing wrong in marketing preventive measures for the benefit of the public. And I think that should be done more by the ADA, the Public Health Service, or state agencies, or county agencies. I don't think it falls necessarily in the arena of the individual, what they call success. What is success in dentistry or medicine? How many second homes you have? What kind of car you drive? Or the kind of service you have? Where's the gratification of being a professional? If you want to make money, and I think everybody's entitled to a decent living and a secure economic base, protection of the family. But if you're seeking wealth, I don't think the areas of the profession is the area that you go into. If that is your area, then I think you lose sight of what I think the parameters of service is. Creates the wrong image, wrong objectives. So I'm not so sure that what we call progress is necessarily what I would think would be in the best interest of the profession or of the public at large.
Okay, let's look at this through the eyes of the graduate. This began with the recruitment of the graduate, his training, and his, not everyone, but a lot of the students' feelings when they do graduate and go into practice.
The concern of a graduate student today varies with the individual. What does a young person do who's completed his education and possibly another year of residency of general practice, assuming that they want to be in general practice, has borrowed, let's say, $50,000, which is not quite the amounts that many of them owe when they finish their education.
Sure.
Assuming they have a low interest, 5%. It takes $50 a week just to pay the interest alone. What is the pressure on that person to make a living? Because the loan, the money they owe for education is literally not great compared to the cost of starting an office. How much does it cost to open up a dental office today? $150,000, $175,000. Now, if they borrowed $50,000 in order to get an education, where did that other $150,000 come from to furnish the office? They have a $200,000 economic burden. The bank's not going to loan them money at 5%. So the pressure is on the professional to be productive economically. It's an unreasonable challenge, in my opinion, to keep him within the scope of what we call professionalism in order to meet his economic requirements. And by the time he gets into practice, usually married or has a child or two, so he's burdened excessively, I think, with debt. What the answer is, I don't know. Maybe there needs to be a cap on how much a person can borrow to be a physician or a dentist. Or is there some mechanism by which they can repay that by rendering a service in an underserved area and wash out part of the obligation. They have tried that in some areas, but it has not been too successful. Whether the ruling of that is inadequate or not, I don't know. But I think the temptation here is just beyond reason.
We've talked about saving teeth. Let's say just a word about what do you feel is the most common cause of the loss of a tooth or teeth?
Philosophically and scientifically speaking, there's no more reason to lose a tooth as to lose any other organ in the body. Only two causes of tooth loss. One is disease, which in most instances is preventable, and accidental injury. They're the only cause of tooth loss. And of course, this falls back into what we discussed earlier about the negligence of the individual. But there's no reason for anyone, there's no scientific reason for anyone not to live from birth to death with their own dentition. And the measure of that in some ways is best studied with the older individual who have a very keen appreciation of the ability of the mastication of food as one of the real qualities of life as they grow older.
Right. Very true.
The body changes and the dentures they have do not fit anymore. The musculature is not as well coordinated. And it's an impairment in this quality of living and should be avoided, especially when there's no need for it.
Right. Well, what do you see on the horizon for dentistry?
In my lifetime, now 56 years, it's been a great transition. Future, the growth of the geriatric population. From an economic reference, a large segment of that population is not only well-to-do, but quite anxious to maintain their health standards, of which one part is their dental health. It's not only very meaningful, they're most appreciative, and there's been a marginal interest, as I have been able to see, in developing that area of dentistry and what we call a geriatric dentist. I want to give the Veterans Administration credit for having developed a training program and funding students who want to pursue that area of dentistry. But it is still too few. Most of the previously educated dentists somehow have no interest in the older patient. They do take more time. There's a new government regulation that's supposed to be legally enforced as of 26 today. By any public facility must have egress in any entrance for a wheelchair. How many dental offices, Bill, have you been into that can accommodate a wheelchair that you know of?
Very few, very few.
Are these offices going to be redesigned? Or how do you move a patient from a wheelchair into a dental chair from 20 or 30 feet away? By hand carry?
Fortunately, my office was built in the time when they made large doorways only by accident, and we can accommodate them, but it's only by accident.
But the average door is what, 3 feet wide, or
Something like
32
that.
inches,
Yeah.
and a wheelchair can't get through there.
No, that's true.
There'll
Very
be a
true.
real impact, I think, on the profession and I think on facilities. But I think the profession is going to be pressured to some extent to move in that direction, and I think that we're going to need to expand care. For instance, we bring senior students into our geriatric center for 3 weeks because the university structure in Chapel Hill doesn't have that level of care available, so those students have to be farmed out to where that patient service is available for that experience, which has another expense of dental education.
You don't suppose we're going to have another specialty within the field of dentistry?
Well, there's no specialty in medicine.
Geriatric dentistry.
Geriodontics, a lot, see, back again to specialization. People who are internists, who qualify in internal medicine, have moved into the geriatric care, who do take care of these people as part of that particular area of medicine. And I think, too, that we need to reevaluate what we call specialization as such and consider dentistry one of the specialties of the healthcare field.
I think it's a person such as you and I that would have the interest in carrying on a practice in geriatric dentistry. It's hard to get these young guys interested in taking care of the older people.
Well, you know, success is our most important product. There are rewards that are not taxable.
Right.
And I think one of them comes in service. And I think dentistry is one of the professions in which I think you can accomplish that gratification and satisfaction.
Very much.
That, I think, is part of the quality of life of the professional. I've enjoyed it, and I'm pleased with it. I don't feel put upon.
I'm very proud. After our discussion today and talking for the last hour and a half to 2 hours, I know, and I have a deep feeling, and being with you the past couple of days, that your life has been guided by some very good principles of living. And I'd like for you to end this in some of your philosophies and thoughts and of principles of your success and living.
I'm not sure I can accommodate the response to that question.
Don't be modest.
I just think that the greatness in life to be all seek is really found within ourselves.
True.
I think that's also true of grief. I think it's also true of parenting, and I've been married going on 53 years, and I can tell you what the answer is to my successful marriage. I was never going to let my wife tell me that a mother was right.
Well, there's one phase of your philosophy. Now, we have another one or two that we could end up with. Because
a good wife, we don't. You cannot be a successful professional man without a damn supportive wife. Not a good supportive wife. The hours of loneliness they have when you're away. A dentist is imposed upon in a way. He has to work on patients in his office. And I've had some outside activities, and I have a phone that whenever I went, I couldn't always call people back at night. I was busy too. And it was an imposition on my patients. Some of them complained about it, and I said, you're absolutely right. I've had one patient quit me, and I don't blame you. I said, I think I do the best I can with what I have to do. And I don't want you to feel imposed upon when you come to me. I don't blame you a bit. But I also think that the 3.5, 4 years I was in, 52 months I was in the Army, and left her alone and to care for the family, that I wasn't there to help her. Coming back and starting all over again in 48 was a burden on her. I don't think that I know a professional man who is successful in my version of success, who doesn't have a good supportive wife. And they're not rewarded. I might also tell you that's true of the ministry. But I've been blessed in that sense, and most of my friends, I'd say, have achieved a certain distinction in life because they had a benevolent, helpful maid at home who protected them from doing chores around the house, which they should do. I didn't do them. I neglected my children because I didn't see them after the war, and I saw it all over again. Our priorities sometimes are not long-term. We don't understand them in the early years. Being the family provider, that took a primary objective in my life.
Very much.
And I'm not sure that I was always right or that I was always wise with it. We respond to needs sometimes, but I'll tell you, a good wife is a blessing that I don't know how many people have them, but those who have them better damn well be grateful for it.
Amen. Amen.
I have one.
Jake, I want to thank you for taking your time to be with us today, and us as the International College of Dentists, to give us an insight into the inside of Jake Freedland. It's been an opportunity for me that I really have enjoyed, and I hope you've had as much fun as I have.
Bill, I've enjoyed it. It's been interesting, and I might add in conclusion, you're easy to please.
Flattery will get you anything you desire. Thank you, Jake.